In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how he helped this high school athlete get a university offer to his current track and field team, so you can take everything you learned from this video, apply it to yourself so you can get offers too. Let's get right into it. So just a quick background here, I'm Jonah from Med Athletics. What I do is I train athletes one-on-one through online coaching. What I'm going to show you is what we did with this athlete so that you can just take it and apply it to yourself. So when you sit down to write your program and plan out your training, first thing you need to do, step one, look at how much time you had. So this athlete, November to June, that's the time that we had. His season starts in May, but he needed to peak for June for the biggest competition. And so when you figure out how much time you have, there's essentially 4 phases you want to go through with training. You have phase 1, which is the general prep phase. Essentially, this is the base or the phase of building the base, and you'll focus on acceleration in this phase. Phase 2, specific prep. So this is where the training gets more specific, less volume, higher intensities, focus on top speed here. The pre-competition phase, this is about a month leading into your competition, or a month before your season starts. So you'd get even more specific, and this is when you would transition to focusing on things like speed endurance. And then finally, you have your competition phase. So once you're in competition and reaching the competition you're trying to peak for, this is what you're focusing on, is peaking and just adjusting on the fly based on competition. So with this specific athlete, just so you know, going forward, we had roughly 30 total weeks of training. So 30 weeks to do all 4 of those phases there. And then next, what we did is we analyzed the athlete here. So analyze yourself, do a self-analysis if you're writing your own program. So this athlete is doing the 100, 200, and 400 meter with an emphasis on the 200. He had basketball 2 times a week, so obviously that affects the training with the occasional tournament. And just since we coached him one-on-one, he would just send me his basketball schedule and his tournament schedule, and then I would kind of adjust the training based on that. And then he had flag football once per week as well. He also dealt with knee tendinopathy, which was from basketball, and basketball tended to cause flare-ups with this, so I had to be careful with my programming. So again, if you're an athlete who has chronic injuries or is going through something, keep that in mind. Don't just ignore it and try and push through the training, because it never works. And then this is a big point I want to touch on too, is he didn't have any specific weaknesses. Like, his strengths were technique and endurance, but as for weaknesses, he just needed to get better all around, need to get faster, improve acceleration, top speed endurance, that kind of thing. Needed to improve qualities like elasticity, stiffness, power, strength, rate of force development, which all these are essentially the main qualities that'll make an athlete fast. So when you're planning your training, don't think about these specific weaknesses you need to work on. Most athletes just need to build an all-around better base, a better engine, you can kind of say. Specifically younger athletes. As you get more elite and more advanced, you'll have obvious weaknesses, but most athletes in high school just need to get better all around. Okay, and so this is the training schedule we used. It's a similar training schedule we use with all of our athletes, so you can steal this, kind of modify it based on your current schedule. If you have other conflictions, that's fine, but in the general prep, typically what we'll do is we'll do day 1, acceleration, day 2 is kind of recovery, day 3 is top speed preparation work, because we don't actually do true top speed work in this phase. Day 4 is again the same as kind of day 2, just with some variation, maybe less volume. And then day 5 is similar to day 1 with acceleration, but with variation, decreased volumes. Day 6 is the speed endurance progression, and notice that I didn't say it's outright speed endurance like the typical 70 to 150 meter sprints. And so for the next phase, specific preparation phase, and the pre-comp phase, which is what those abbreviations stand for, this is what I had to go with, was acceleration on day 1, recovery day 2 and 4, and then day 3 is when his flag football got introduced, so I just gave him a lift to do after he did flag football. And then I actually had to push the top speed work to day 5 instead, with the speed endurance progression on day 6. In an ideal world, what I would do in this phase with athletes is probably day 1 acceleration, day 3 top speed, and then day 5 speed endurance, and then kind of just shovel in the recovery days in between those. So yeah, take the schedule and see if it works for you. So getting into the general preparation phase, once you have your training planned out and you know roughly how long each phase needs to last, what you want to do in this phase is build volume and prepare the body. So things are relatively high volume and low intensity. So to keep sprints low intensities, we do short distances like up to 30 meters, and you might do them in running shoes to start versus in spikes. In this phase, do 10 to 30 meter sprints, do them resisted or unresisted. You can do resisted by dragging a sled, dragging a weight that's attached to a rope, or doing hill sprints as well. Those are all great. Highly recommend doing resisted sprints if you can. As for roughly how many reps, typically we fall in the 8 to 18 rep range, or about 200 to 400 total meters in distance. Shorter the distance, the more reps you might do. So maybe you do like 15 10 meter sprints, but you wouldn't do 15 30 meter sprints. And same with the plyometrics, high volume, low intensity. So what we did is just like plyometric circuits, like chuck together a bunch of plyometric exercises like pogos, in place jumps, pogo variations like rotational pogos, split pogos, everything like that, just to keep things sub-maximal volumes, build a plyometric base, that kind of thing. Lifting follows the same principle, so you'll see OLs, that's Olympic lifts, so like clean, snatches, high pulls, that kind of stuff. So in this phase, relatively light just to build the base. So 4 to 6 sets of that for 3 to 5 reps per set, only working like 50 to 70 of your 1 rep max. And then for the actual weightlifting, so the basic lifts, so think squats, like deep squats, not quarter or half squats, deep squats, deadlifts, front squats, bench, pull-ups, rows, all that kind of stuff. 3 to 5 sets of roughly 5 to 8 reps is what we'll stick to in this phase at under 80% of your 1 rep max. And just so you know, this is pretty much how we structure all of our high intensity sessions. So we'll start with the sprint work, then we'll go into the plyometrics, and then we'll go into the weightlifting, which starts with Olympic lifts, and then we'll finish it off with the basic heavy weightlifting. So I recommend structuring your sessions like this. If you can't do all that in one day, do the sprints and the plyometrics in the same day, and then push the weightlifting to the next day, and then take 48 to 72 hours between the weightlifting and your next sprint and plyo session. As for speed endurance, I touched on this in a previous slide. It's a speed endurance progression. So in this phase, our type of speed endurance is extensive tempo. So essentially 100 to 200 meter runs at 70 to 80% speed max. What this does is this prepares you to do speed endurance work later. And so what you'll do is you'll use incomplete rest. So maybe an example workout would be like 10 times 100 meter runs at 70 to 80% speed with 2 to 3 minutes of rest. So this phase lasted for him roughly 10 weeks because he had some knee flare-ups from basketball. So we kind of had to regress the training and progress it, but we had lots of time, so I was willing to do that. General prep for younger athletes, say like high school athletes, not a long training age, roughly about 4 weeks. Roughly 8 weeks. And then for higher level athletes, it'd be about 4 weeks. Just to add in here, he wanted to compete in a meet in the 60 meter indoors for December. And so I was like, why not? Let's see what happens. And he had really good improvement in his 60 compared to last year, only after about a month and a half of training. So we were pretty pumped about that because things were already off to a great start. So after the 10 weeks of general prep, we moved into the specific prep. So again, the goal here, raise the intensity, lower the volumes, and then get more specific in the training. So how that looks for acceleration is now we're going, instead of what we did in general prep was we would do like 2-point starts or crouch starts for the accelerations. Now we would do 3-point starts and then eventually progress into block starts because it was more specific to competition. This is where we actually introduce and focus on top speed is in the specific prep phase. So in the previous phase, we were just building into it. So maybe that'd be like submaximal runs, wicket runs, dribble runs, that kind of thing. But in here, it's legitimate 30 to 60 meter sprints, full rests, and 10 to 20 meter fly sprints is what we used with this athlete. What we did was we did a lot of fly sprints, and then later on in specific prep is when we just did traditional like 30, 60 meter starts from like a crouch start or a 3-point. You can play around with that. As for rep ranges, anywhere from 4 to 6 is typically what we did, maybe 7 if he was feeling really good that day, but work in the 4 to 6 range is good for most athletes, I would say. And then so the plyometric intensity went up, volume went down, so we didn't do the circuits anymore, we just did standard traditional plyometrics. So on top speed days, you want to do vertical based plyometrics because top speed is vertically dominant, like as far as you're applying force downwards into the ground. So your plyometrics want to match that. So what we did was vertical bounds, essentially just bounding, but with the emphasis on going up instead of forward. And then hurdle hops as well, because it's a vertical emphasis. His knee was becoming a bit of an issue with basketball, so I had to watch out on the hurdle hops. So what we did instead was we would do a hurdle hop, but we would just stick the landing and focus on the landing versus like the continuous hurdle hopping. And that seemed to work really well for him. So we did a lot of that. And then on the acceleration day, you want to pair it with horizontal plyometrics since acceleration is horizontally dominated in terms of where you're applying force. So do things like broad jumps, triple broad jumps, standing triple jumps, which is what we did in this phase for him. In the lifting, also intensity went up, volume went down. So you'll see the Olympic lifts, the percentages went up to 70 to 85%, 5 to 6 sets, roughly 2 to 4 reps is where I worked with him. Again, his knee was a bit of an issue on the catching portion of the clean. So what we did instead was we just did high pulls and then he would drop the weight and he didn't have to catch it, and that seemed to work great for him. So that was just a modification we made. And the basic lifting, like the heavy slow lifting, squats, bench, that kind of stuff, that went up as well. Lower volumes, 3 to 5 sets of roughly 3 to 5 reps is what we did and what you can do as well at 80% to 100% of your 1 rep max. And so keep in mind, we didn't, and I don't recommend doing the heavy Olympic lifts and the heavy weightlifting every single sprint plyo weightlifting day. We would do each of these once a week, and then we would do each of these heavy lifting once a week, and then on the other days we would do the lighter Olympic lifts that I mentioned in the last slide and the lighter weightlifting that I mentioned in the last slide as well. But we would do some variation. So maybe on the max day, we would do like a heavy squat, heavy bench. And then on the other lighter lifting day, we would do some unilateral or contralateral work, like a split squat, lunges, step ups, that kind of thing. So keep that in mind with your training as well. And then as for the speed endurance, so again, we're still progressing to true speed endurance. So what you would want to do in this phase is progress the extensive tempo to intensive tempo. So the runs can go up to 300 meters. They don't have to. And they're at about 80 to 90% speed. And the rest, to allow for that faster speed, becomes longer. So instead of doing like the 2 to 3 minute rest, you might do 4 to 6 minutes instead. And then near the end of specific prep, we introduce special endurance, which you'll want to do as well as progress from the intensive tempo to the special endurance. So the runs, again, can go up to 350 meters. They don't have to. And they would be at roughly 90 to 95% speed. And the rest ranges on this are actually full recoveries. So you would do like 8 to 15 minute rest to ensure everything is quality. And this is kind of where you're focusing on doing your race modeling type of stuff. Like if you're a 200 meter runner, you might do like 250s, 200s, or 180s, and you're just focusing on going around the curve, that kind of stuff, feeling smooth, feeling bouncy. And then, so after that, we have the pre-competition phase. So this is about 4 weeks before the season starts. As you saw earlier, it followed the same schedule as specific prep essentially, but top speed was replaced by speed endurance, and then basketball was over at this point. So day 2 and 4 recovery days came back in. If you're wondering what we do on recovery days, we do a lot of circuit training, easy tempo, like 60 to 70% you can do on the grass, but circuits and that kind of stuff is the biggest thing because you're getting in some general training, but you'll actually find that type of work, it tires you out, but you'll feel much better the next day if you do it. And so a key here is that top speed is replaced by speed endurance, and you'll see way down at the bottom is the speed endurance is introduced in this phase at no more than 150 meters, and this is 95%. So this would be your typical 120s, 150s, that kind of stuff. Acceleration in this phase got a bit more intense and specific because now we're going out to 40 meters and we're doing everything from blocks. And even though top speed was replaced by speed endurance, we might do a top speed session every other week just to review and maintain that quality and skill. Plyos, relatively the same. You would keep the intensity the same, but you would add some variety and maybe even progress the intensity as well. So instead of doing like the broad jump, triple broad jump, and standing triple jump for the horizontal plyometrics, you might do some short bounding, like alternating leg bounds or single leg bounds, or versions where you do 2 bounds on one leg, switch to 2 bounds on the other leg. So that adds variety and that adds intensity as well. At the end of this phase, we subbed out the traditional weightlifting, like the heavy, slow stuff, with ballistic lifting, which is essentially weighted jumps, like weighted quarter squat jumps, half squat jumps, deep squat, lunge jumps, split jumps, all that kind of stuff. And then even though we focused on speed endurance, we still kept in some special endurance because he was doing the 400. So we did some runs up to 350 meters at 90 to 95% speed, some 300s just to prepare him for that race. And so once you get into competition phase, it's no more about following this set schedule. You kind of have to adapt to the meets. For this athlete, and I'm sure for some of you, the meets weren't always on the same day. Some days would be a Wednesday, some days would be a Friday, a Saturday. What you also want to do, what I did with this athlete, what I've tested with myself and my athletes, is the importance of doing a pre-meet warm-up and possibly some block accelerations. So what do I mean by that? The day before your track meet, the worst thing you can do in most cases is absolutely nothing. Usually the best thing you can do is at least go to the track, go through your entire meet day warm-up. This will get you stimulated. This will get your body feeling good going into the next day. And then if you want, do just a few block accelerations just to, again, practice that, get up the confidence, stimulate your body. And so what I typically did with this athlete was like 5 or anywhere from 5 to 8 reps of just 20-meter sprints from blocks, and that's it. As for what we wanted to cover throughout the week, and this is kind of how you can approach your training as well, slot in an acceleration day every single week. Acceleration is easiest on your body compared to like top speed, speed endurance, that kind of stuff. And it's so important that you want to practice it every week. As for if we put in top speed, speed endurance, or special endurance, we chose one of these to put in during the training week if it made sense to fit in. And this was essentially just based on how this athlete thought his track meet went or what events he did. So say he thought he died out a bit at the end, then maybe we'd put in some speed endurance or some special endurance. Say he felt a bit slow throughout the 60 to 70 meter portion of the race, then maybe we would put in a top speed workout. Or if he went to a meet and only did the 100 and 200 but didn't do the 400, then maybe in training that week I would give him a 350 just to review and maintain that quality that he needs for the 400. So that's how you can approach your training in season as well, is kind of just adapt on the fly based on what makes sense. Plyometrics, you can do 1 to 2 times per week. For him, we probably only did once per week, and we alternated between the easy horizontal bounds and the hurdle hops, and sometimes vertical bounds as well. But we tried not to keep things too intense on the plyometric days because we didn't want that to hamper his training or his competition performance. So in this phase, just ballistic lifts and Olympic lifts only. So at this point, we're not doing any heavy slow lifting, and we're doing heavy Olympic lifts, working from 85 to 100%, and we're working up to a 1 rep max on these for intensity. But again, we're only doing that Olympic lifting only once per week, maybe only once every couple weeks, and then on the other days, we're just doing the lighter stuff still. So what can you take away from this video, apply to yourself so that you can hopefully get some offers, get your speed faster, all that kind of stuff? Focus on the basic big three, which are the sprinting, the plyometrics, and the weightlifting. Keep all of them simple. Just go out, sprint certain distances, sprint the distance you saw in this video, use the prescriptions I gave you in this video. Plyometrics, you don't need to do anything fancy, just bound, do hurdle hops, do plyometric circuits to build the base. Weightlifting, you can do Olympic lifts if you want, you can do things like trap bar jumps if you prefer those. As far as the actual weightlifting, keep it simple. You got your squats, split squats, deadlifts, bench, all that stuff. You don't need to get too fancy in the weight room. This is the stuff that really helps, especially you younger athletes. Take 48 to 72 hours between these sessions, so 2 to 3 days between a sprint plyo weightlifting session. If you're doing that all in the same day, take 48 to 72 hours between the next time you repeat that. If you're doing the weightlifting in a separate day, do the sprints, plyometrics on day 1, do the weightlifting on day 2, and then take 48 to 72 hours between that weightlifting session and your next sprint plyo session. Again, just focus on improving your raw engine and ability. Focus on getting better all around, improving your speed all around, power, strength, rate of force development, all that stuff. Don't get too complicated with it. And then make sure you phase your training. So you go from a phase of focusing on acceleration, then you go to a phase of focusing on top speed, and then you go to a phase of focusing on speed and special endurance. And just make sure you consistently train hard and smart. Don't quit. If you get injured, don't just stop training for a couple weeks. Keep training, but just do what you can. Find a good program, make a good program, and then just do that, and you will see good results. But I appreciate your time today. Thank you for watching. If you got some value from this and you like these kind of videos, then consider subscribing. Peace.